Two photographs, same scene, 30 seconds apart. One of them is what my camera decided on its own default setting. The other is what I decided instead. I'm going to show you exactly what changed and why it matters more for black and white photography than almost any decision you'll make in the edit. This is the first shot, and this is where it ended up. Same gorge, same light, same camera, one metering decision. And I want to be straight with you from the start. The camera isn't at fault here. It did exactly what it's designed to do. The problem was that I had set it to make a different decision than the one I needed. Once I understood that, a lot of things clicked. We're going to cover why default metering works against you on certain scenes, the one change I made and exactly how I made it. Where this approach breaks down, and it does, it doesn't work for every photo. And then the full sequence, what I saw in the gorge, what I got first, and what I eventually made. Before I get into the how, stick around to the end. I've got something that might help more than any technique will, and I'll keep it brief. Let me tell you what I was looking at. Goredale Scar is part of a long-term project I've been working on in the Yorkshire Dales, trying to photograph the way that the landscape holds its history in stone. And what you're looking at in this gorge is the result of a relatively small stream cutting through limestone for hundreds of millions of years. The scale of it stops you. What stopped me wasn't just the waterfall, it was the light, the way the gorge walls were framing the sky above, the way the shadows were falling on the stone on either side, creating a natural vignette, and that strip of white water at the back, almost luminous against the dark. I could see a photograph I wanted, the weight of the stone, the brightness cutting through. So I set up on aperture priority, average or matrix metering, that's the default, and I took the shot. And that's what I got. It's not wrong, but it's not what I saw. Here's what's actually happening on your camera's default metering. It reads the entire frame and tries to expose everything so the scene averages out to a mid-tone, mid-grey. And on most scenes, that's a reasonable starting point. But this scene isn't average. It's got a significant amount of deep shadow with a bright sky above and bright water in the centre. The camera saw that darkness and did exactly what it's designed to do. It lengthened the exposure to compensate. 3.2 seconds. I checked the histogram. The exposure has been pushed right. The shadow was being lifted away from where I needed them, and the highlights in that sky were very close to being clipped. The camera had brightened the scene I needed to stay dark. So I switched to spot metering and pointed the spot at the sky, the brightest part of the scene that still needed to hold detail. The reading it came back with was 2 seconds. That's more than a stop shorter than the average reading. That single change pulled the histogram back from the right, deepened the shadows in the stone, and brought the highlights back from the edge. I made a small adjustment to the aperture, pushing the exposure just far enough right to make sure I was keeping the shadow detail without clipping the sky. No clipping warnings, shadows are present. That's the starting point I needed. And the histogram tells you the camera is now working with what I intended. The image is starting to carry the weight of that stone. Before I show you the final image, I want to spend a moment on where this breaks down, because it does. On a flat, even scene, grey stone wall under an overcast sky, there's no clear lighting to anchor the spot to. So average metering is often doing a pretty reasonable job in that situation, so leave it alone. On scenes where the important detail is in the shadow rather than the highlight, a dark interior with bright windows, for example, spot metering the bright area crushes the very thing you wanted to keep. In those cases, you'd expose to protect the shadow end instead. And on scenes with extreme dynamic range, where no single exposure can hold both ends, that's a bracketing job or a graduated filter. A metering change won't save it. The principle is always the same. Your camera doesn't know what you intended. It can't. Your job is to direct it towards the part of the scene that matters most to your vision. The setting follows your intention, not the other way round. So here's the full sequence. Average metering, technically acceptable, the camera's decision. Spot metered, exposure adjusted, my decision. And this is what it became. The edit didn't create that. The exposure decision gave me a starting point that made it possible. When I converted to black and white, the shadow weight in that stone, the luminance of the water, the texture in the rock, it was all there because I'd made the right decision before I pressed the shutter. I wanted you to feel what I felt standing in that gorge, the scale of the stone, the smallness of the water that had cut through it. That's not something you can find in the edit if it wasn't there in the exposure. This is where it starts. Average, matrix or default metering makes one decision for every scene. Spot metering lets you make a different one, a deliberate one based on what you actually intend. That's the whole idea. Simple to describe. The hardest part is being clear enough about your intention before you reach for the dial. And I'd argue that clarity is where fine art black and white photography actually begins. If your images are technically solid, but still not matching what you intended when you press the shutter, the gap usually isn't a setting. It's something that comes before the settings. I built a free scorecard that shows you exactly where to look, and there's a link in the description. I hope it helps you. In the meantime, go out and have some fun with your camera and think carefully about how you're going to meter your scene. And I'll look forward to seeing you next time.